Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're focusing on something that's, pretty critical out there on job sites, crane safety. Specifically, OSHA's take on freefall and controlled load lowering.
And for good reason. We're talking heavy machinery, lots of moving parts, big potential for things to go wrong.
Yeah, if a load comes crashing down, it's not just equipment at risk. So this is for everyone, really. Whether you're a safety pro, making sure things run smoothly.
Or the crane operator themselves, up in the cab making those critical decisions.
Or even if you're just starting out, working towards that crane operator license, gotta know the rules of the game.
Right, because these rules, they're not just arbitrary. We're talking 1926.1426, and it's all about preventing those worst-case scenarios.
So let's dive right in, shall we? Imagine this. You've got a crane, boom, extended, loads hanging there, and suddenly it starts free falling.
Talk about a nightmare.
Yeah, not a picture anyone wants in their head. So that begs the question, when does OSHA absolutely forbid this kind of live boom use? Where do they draw the line?
Well, they spell it out pretty clearly in 1926.1426A1. They've got 6 situations listed where it's a hard NO. First one, if you got someone in the drop zone.
Meaning under the boom?
Yeah.
Or right under the load itself?
Exactly. If that load were to free fall, well, the consequences don't bear thinking about.
Definitely a recipe for disaster. What else is on OSHA's no-fly list?
Right alongside that, you can't use a live boom if you're hoisting someone UP with the crane. Double the risk there. Then there's power lines.
Yeah, those are always a big concern on any job site.
Doesn't matter if they're near the boom's path or near the load itself, free falls out of the question. Too much risk of electrocution.
Electricity and heavy machinery, never a good mix.
Yeah.
Okay, so people, power lines, what else sends OSHA scrambling for the rule book?
They get into some specific scenarios then, working over a shaft, for example.
And not just any shaft, one with people inside.
Right. Imagine the boom fails, drops the load right down that shaft, not only injuring those below, but potentially causing a collapse, trapping them.
Yeah, that's a level of bad we don't even want to think about.
Same logic applies to a cofferdam, if there are people inside. And then, of course, refineries, tank farms, those are off limits too.
Volatile materials, all it takes is one spark. Things could go south real fast.
So those are OSHA's big 6, the situations where a live boom is absolutely forbidden.
Makes you realize how much thought goes into these regulations, trying to cover all the bases, protect everyone involved.
Right. It's all about minimizing the risk, anticipating those potential hazards.
But hold on, are there any exceptions to this rule? Ever a time where a live boom gets the green light?
Actually, there are a couple of exceptions. OSHA lays those out in 1926.1426A2. First one, cranes manufactured before October 31st, 1984.
So the vintage cranes get a pass, huh? Why is that? Just because they're older?
Probably because they were designed before all the modern safety features became standard. Applying the same rules might not be practical.
Makes sense. And what's the other exception?
Cranes operating on vessels or floating platforms. Think maritime operations.
Can't exactly hold a crane on a rocking ship to the same standard as one on solid ground.
Different environment, different challenges.
But even in those situations where a live boom is allowed, how do we make sure those lifts are as safe as possible? What's OSHA's take on preventing those free falls in the first place?
Well, it's all about backup systems.
You mean like having a plan B if things go wrong?
Exactly, like the emergency brake in your car.
Yeah.
And OSHA gets pretty specific about what those backup systems should look like. We're talking redundancy here.
Sounds like they're not taking any chances. So what kind of systems are we talking about? What does OSHA actually require?
Let's break it down. First off, friction drums. Now, this is the part of the crane that houses the wire rope, the muscle for lifting.
Okay, got it. So what's special about the friction drum?
It needs a clutch for smooth movement and a brake for controlled lowering. But here's the kicker. It also needs a secondary brake.
Whoa, double brakes. Why is that?
This secondary brake is specifically designed to hold that boom steady if the main braking system fails. No room for error there.
So it's not just about having brakes, it's about having brakes on top of brakes. Makes sense. And hold on, I see a note here. Clutches and motors don't count as brakes. Why is that?
Right, because while they control the boom's movement, they're not designed to hold the weight if there's a sudden failure. Safety over convenience, always. And speaking of hydraulics, it's worth noting that hydraulic boom cylinders, those also need a built-in holding device.
Okay, starting to see the bigger picture here. We've covered a lot of ground just on the boom itself. But there's more to a crane than just the boom, right? What about the load itself? Are the regulations around preventing that from dropping?
Absolutely, and that's where things get even more interesting. Yeah, we're moving into 1926.14260DD now. This section deals with the load itself when it's hanging in midair. And it lays out 5 cases where only controlled lowering is allowed, NO dropping the load.
Okay, so even more restrictions on when free fall is a no-go. It's like OSHA's building a multi-layered safety net here. Makes sense.
Right.
What are those 5 cases?
Well, first off, someone directly under the load. No surprise there.
Yeah, got to keep those folks safe. Controlled lowering only. Makes sense.
And the same goes for if someone's being hoisted by the crane. Again, double checking human lives on the line here.
Seems like OSHA is really focusing on protecting anyone who's close to the crane's operation.
Absolutely. And that extends to power lines, too. If they're anywhere near the load's path, dropping is out of the question.
Power lines. Power lines, they keep coming up. I guess with all that voltage, it's no wonder OSHA's so cautious.
Thousands of volts. Yeah, no room for error there. The last 2 scenarios on this list, working over a shaft and working over a cofferdam unless it's empty.
Right, and we talked about those shaft collapses earlier. Avoiding those at all costs.
Exactly. Dropping a load in those situations, that's just asking for trouble.
It's all starting to connect now. OSHA is pretty clear about when free fall is a hard no and when controlled lowering is the only way to go. But wait a second, there's one more thing we haven't talked about yet. Telescoping booms. Those things add a whole other dimension to crane operation.
You're right, telescoping booms. Gotta account for those. And 1926.1426C lays out the rule. Hydraulic telescoping booms half E to have their own holding device to prevent sudden retraction.
Wow, I hadn't even thought about that, but it makes total sense. Imagine that boom retracting unexpectedly mid-lift, load swinging around, putting everyone in danger.
Exactly, and that's the whole point of these regulations, right? They make us think about all the potential hazards, even the ones that aren't so obvious.
Yeah, this has been eye-opening, even for someone like me who's not out there operating cranes every day. It's not just knowing how to work the machinery, it's about the regulations and the why behind them.
Exactly, it's like these regulations, they're codified lessons learned, real-world incidents, sometimes with tragic consequences.
Yeah, that's a sobering thought.
But they represent years of experience, best practices, trying to protect everyone on the job site, operator, ground crew, even people just passing by.
But to recap, it's crucial for anyone working with cranes, whether you're seasoned or just starting out. Know when free fall is a no-go, understand the backup systems for different booms, and when controlled lowering is a must.
Absolutely.
It's not just checking boxes, it's internalizing these rules, understanding the real-world impact on safety. But beyond just knowing the rules, what does all this mean for our listeners? The safety pros, crane operators, the folks studying for their licenses, what can they actually take away and apply to their work?
That's the million-dollar question, right? How do we translate regulations into real-world practice? Can't just memorize them for an exam.
Got to make it practical.
Got to understand the WHY and apply that on every single lift.
So it's about moving beyond rote memorization and embracing a deeper understanding.
For sure. And that's where personal practices, on-site checks, those become so important. Like, think of it as adding another layer of safety on top of the regulations.
Another layer. I like that. What would that look like?
For example, before every lift, just take a moment to assess the surroundings. Are there people in the drop zone? Power lines nearby? Anything else that needs to be addressed?
It's like a mental checklist, running through those scenarios we talked about before you even start the crane.
Exactly. And don't be afraid to speak up if something feels off. Whether you're the operator, a safety pro, or just another worker, safety is everyone's responsibility.
It's a team effort, everyone looking out for each other. We've covered a lot today, the specifics, the bigger picture, and it's clear OSHA is really trying to create a comprehensive framework for safe crane operation.
Yeah, and it comes down to this. Understanding these rules isn't just about compliance, it's about protecting lives, preventing injuries, making sure everyone goes home safe at the end of the day.
Beautifully said. And on that note, I want to thank you, our expert, for all the incredible knowledge and insights you've shared with us today. It's been a real deep dive.
Happy to do it. Always love talking about crane safety, sharing what I've learned.
And of course, a huge thanks to Safety One Source for sponsoring this deep dive, making it possible for us to bring this information to our listeners. Their dedication to safety education is seriously commendable.
Yeah, they're doing important work, making workplaces safer.
Now, before we wrap up, I want to leave our listeners with a thought-provoking question to chew on as they go about their work. We've talked about the regulations, the backup systems, the procedures. But beyond all that, what personal practices or on-site checks can you implement to further minimize those free fall risks?
That's a great question. It challenges us to go beyond the basics, think critically about how to enhance safety on our own job sites.
Exactly. We've given you the foundation, now it's your turn to build on it. What extra steps, what precautions can you put in place to make your work environment even safer when it comes to cranes?
So listeners, take some time to reflect on that. What can you do above and beyond to minimize those risks and make every lift a safe one?
That's all the time we have for today. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into crane safety. We'll see you next time for another fascinating exploration.
And until then, gotta stay safe out there.
Absolutely. Knowledge is power, especially when it comes to safety. So keep learning, keep asking those questions, keep striving to make every lift a safe one.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
And with that, we'll sign off for today. Thanks for joining us on the deep dive.
See you next time.
And a special thanks again to Safety One Source for making this deep dive possible. You're doing important work in keeping our workplaces safe.
Their commitment to safety education is really making a difference out there.
All right, everyone. Until next time, stay safe.